Hey, brother.
Hey man, how's it going?
Good. I'm just crunching numbers right now for that other offer, going through the last 4 weeks of cost per app, cost per lead, cost per click, cost per thousand, all those good numbers. You know what I mean?
Good times.
Yep. Yep. It's amazing what you can see, when you actually track certain data points like that. Like in the past,
Yeah,
seeing a change for cost per app go from $160 down to $35.
yeah, 100%.
Cost per call book going from 275 down to 55. I mean, those are some big changes. And it just shows how much like little tweaks up front have such a massive thing. And I wish more people realize that with marketing, but in every area of their business as well. I think some people miss that with what you're going to do, being that VP of growth for them.
Hmm.
Hey, we take this one area, tweak it by this little bit, dude, that's a massive change there in the back end. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so, um, so yeah, I'm kind of glad we're doing this. So what I was kind of thinking was, me go through, kind of ask you some questions. So number one, I can learn more about what you do. But actually I'll put this in the software and I'll get this all cut up and I'll put a thing in Google. So I'll upload them there so you'll have them directly. Maybe you can kind of upload some of those. And ask your permission, I guess. Would you mind if I shared that on my own stuff too, or would that
Not at
bother?
all. No, it wouldn't bother me at all. Of course.
Okay. One of the things of looking at what you do,
Mhm.
kind of looking at setting up some of the front end marketing for you and trying to get the people the right information so they really grasp what you do. You talk at such a high technical level. Like if
Mhm.
you were trying to tell your 5-year-old daughter, hey, what's daddy do? Right? What would you tell her you would do for businesses?
What I typically tell people when they ask me what I do is I tell them that I start, scale, and sell technology companies. Like that's typically the line that I'll give.
Yep.
Um, and through the lens, like to whatever degree they want to dig in, I'll break down the methodology. Now for growth team, obviously, the scope is a lot more limited than it would be for one of my own companies, where we're actually talking about things like building a team and hiring and creating culture and building out operating models and ensuring that we have a good working rhythm and cadence for the business, and ensuring that everyone has clear KPIs, lines of accountability. We set up advancement plans for every single person so they know exactly what it takes to get a raise or get a promotion. Like all of those things also happen. Raising capital, going and soliciting for sale, things like that. But in terms of growth team, like we're putting all of that burden on the shoulders of the founder, to whatever the degree they need support. Obviously we're here, but
Yeah.
We're doing what I consider the fun part, what most people consider to be the scary and confusing part, where we're actually using math and science to grow the business. So we're running experiments just like you would in science class in middle school. The only difference is the outcome that we're trying to elicit isn't a little explosion by dropping a Mentos into a Coke bottle. It's driving customers through a customer journey and leading to cash every single month like clockwork. So that's the main difference. We're applying behavioral psychology and sound scientific method principles and good math and potential shortcuts along the way, best practices to companies that I think have the potential to grow faster.
Yeah. Me being a past brick and mortar owner, had my own online business. You and I met actually. I was a sales individual, and you bought from the company I worked for, which helped with lead generation, right?
Mm.
And so many people out there just look at their business going, I just need to run ads. I just need to get a setter in the business. I need to get a better sales individual. Not that that's not a piece of what you do, but it's a small percentage. And I think a lot of people, and if correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like so many individuals think that's the only route, and they're missing out 90% of growth. when I started my own business too, yeah, running ads was important, but there's a lot of pieces that can be improved to grow. So what are some of the things that you do that separate yourself from just your typical, hey, we're going to book you 1,000 calls, or we're going to run some ads? What are some key things that you really specialize?
The biggest difference between what I do and what a lot of other companies are doing to, for example, bring in, like if you're a marketing agency or a lead gen agency or something like that, usually you're working with like a small to mid-market company. They want to make a couple $1 million a year and they're over the moon excited. I have not worked in that world really. My quest and the people that I surround myself are the kinds of people that are wanting to build, companies that on the low end are $100 million businesses. And, through that lens, we want to create outcomes that mimic that sort of type of outcome, right? What we want to do is learn from those growth stories and say, how do we create something similar? And there are a few cases where it's been as simple as add to salesperson to cash in the bank.
Yeah.
But those are few and far between. Like those are the exception, not the rule. The vast majority of situations involve a series of compounding loops. Many of them, most of them involve some sort of viral loop inside the product, where through using the product, you're exposing the product to others who might also want to use it in a similar way. So that anytime you do pay to acquire customers, whether it's through direct sales and prospecting, or it's through advertising in whatever way that comes through, that acts just as an accelerant to the existing compounding loops within the product, the viral loops, et cetera. So like we, for example, have mapped out 12 viral loops, 11 other ways to craft non-viral, what would be considered linear channels into compounding loops. So things like direct sales can be compounding if you don't mind having a very large staff doing so, or you don't mind really leveraging the crap out of technology to do so. That can be a little bit labor intensive up front to set up, but once it's set up, it's one of the more powerful assets that the business can have. And the reason why that's important early on is when we score different initiatives, scalability is always an element that they're scored through, and ads don't necessarily scale infinitely. Now, if you have the type of business model where if you acquire 100 customers, you're $100 million business, they're paying you $1 million a year on average, and you're like enterprise, if you're like Salesforce or something like that. Okay, that's totally fine. You can advertise just like a normal company would, and you don't necessarily have to worry about compounding loop strategies, but they also do, companies like that have collaboration virality built into them without even knowing that they're doing that, right? So a company like Palantir, for example, it's being adopted institutionally. Those are like B2G sales. And you can go pay and prospect to acquire those leads because you don't necessarily, exactly what your customers are. They have readily available contact information. So you can go attack every aspect of that market in like a linear way without a compounding strategy. Because you're not going to see a ton of new states or new municipalities or new national governments pop up. So like when you have companies that serve businesses or that serve individuals, it's a different story, right? Businesses start every single day. New people get to new ages in life where they have new needs every single day. So within that lens, being able to set up the compounding loops is one of the foundational elements that will even enable $100 million a year business, in contrast to one that makes like a couple $1 million a year.
Yeah. And, I know that you're running ads to try to find leads. That's one of your strategies using for your own business right now.
Right.
And when we look at like the nature of social media, you have a guru for your business coach, a guru for running ads, a guru for XYZ, your agency for all of these things. And you get all these people, I feel like, are stuck in a pigeonhole because you're not working with like your average, hey, I'm a personal trainer, I've got this or that. Now, there are some fitness companies that actually are looking to come on board with you, right? That, wow, we could do some massive stuff with. But I think that's a big problem. So many people pigeonhole them. They have to do a 5K, 10K mastermind or group coaching thing. And so the only way really to do that is do leads to really grow fast. And one thing I always tried to, work with business owners on that. If you're just running ads and you don't have other strategies, what happens when, like last year in August, when Facebook changed their algorithm, and some of the groups I was in, it was actually named, Adpocalypse, because of 40% of the people got their Facebook account banned. Now you've got no leads, you got no business. You talked about, have viral loops in there. I'm just going to kind of pitch you real quick. I just read that, but your book, I'm getting through it. It's really, really good and solid. But the people that you're really marketing, it's not your 5K coaching program offer. So, but there's the same type of business growth strategies in every single business. So the businesses you're really targeting, who are they? Like, who is that perfect individual for you?
It's a company that has the ability to scale. So for example,
Define that.
Yeah. So let's say you've got like somebody that has a coaching company, for example, and the intention of that company is to pay the founder a lot of money. And you could scale that company, and maybe we can help. But usually the kinds of stories that we want to create would be, technology companies or companies that have, wide distribution potential, where they have the ability to manufacture in mass quantities, and are subscription based. Like, first of all, they would all need to be subscription based, as of today. But the biggest difference is, like, can this technology company, for example, scale beyond the ability for the founder to personally fulfill it? And if that answer is yes, that's awesome, right? Because that potentially allows us to, the ability to scale that business to 100 million and beyond. If, for example, we instead go after, coaches, consultants, marketing agencies, and things like that, we're playing in a red ocean, first of all, because, it's very, very easy for a lot of companies to say, hey, you're charging, 3 to 10 grand a month per client. If you only get one more client through our services, it's profitable. And we can, like, make that argument, and it does work. But, like, it's less interesting from a global impact perspective. And, our intention when I first started this company was, like, I want to change the way businesses are grown. Like, that was the big vision, right?
Can I ask you a question? Why that's not your tagline? Or I guess a little bit more, in the marketing piece to let people know.
Yeah, like when prospects hop on with me, if they ask, like, sometimes I'll have people ask me, if you've had all these exits, like, why are you still building companies? And I was like, okay, if you're good at something and you enjoy it, do you just stop doing it because you're good at it and you enjoy it?
Well, what is your past history speaking of that, Travis? Let's hear it.
So I've been starting, scaling, and selling tech companies for the last 14 years. In that time, I've been fortunate enough to sell 8 of them. There have been other great outcomes for ones that I was not a founder of that are not included in those 8. A couple of those have sold and gone public and so forth. And, also have gotten companies on the Inc. 500, fastest growing private companies in the country. I've gotten most of them featured in most of the big publications you've heard of. And I'm a growth mentor for multiple, billion-dollar Silicon Valley accelerator hybrid fund / accelerator programs, like 500 Startups, Techstars, SOSV, IndieBio, Hacks, Orbit, Level Up, all of those. Try to do some speaking on the university circuit quite a bit, in terms of scaling businesses, marketing, AI, et cetera. Have done that anywhere from, Latvia to Nigeria to Rochester, New York. So those are a couple highlights, I suppose. Also published a couple books and am a currently doctoral candidate in marketing and artificial intelligence. So those are a couple of the, I would say, items. And Just at the end of the day, probably the thing I'm most proud of is just I get to help founders win bigger every day.
That's
So
awesome.
that's always
You're
fulfilling.
definitely more of an artist, right? Like you said, I mean, you've got a skill. So like
Sure.
the last company you built and you scaled it, how quick before you exited? Like was it a year,
Uh,
5 years?
3 years. Yeah.
And when you exited, what did you sell that company for?
A little bit shy of 70 million.
So do you need to work right now?
No, I mean, like need from a
Right, right, yeah.
if we're quantifying need as like, do I need it to pay my bills? No. But do I need it to not have me go crazy? Yes.
And that's my point of, if someone asks you like, if they know that what you've done in your past, and you're talking billions of dollars worth of business growth you've done, right?
Mhm.
A lot of people are like, well, why are you still working? Why aren't you living on a beach somewhere?
Mhm.
How old are
Well, I
you?
mean, I do live on the beach. Technically,
Well,
I live on the beach, but
but how old are you?
I'm 35.
Are you going to go sit on that beach and drink a margarita for 8 hours every single day for the next 55 years of your life?
No, I mean, and I don't drink alcohol anyway.
Well, yeah, but you get
Yeah,
my, yeah, and
yeah,
so it's
and
a passion growing, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
what feeds your soul. I mean, you need to do it,
You do
and
more of what you love
yep,
when like that sort of thing happens, right? So like
it's
that's
one of the
the
reasons why I
bottom
love
line.
coaching too. I love making a transformation in other people's lives. And there's people that 20 years ago I impacted their life, where now I run into like their child who they knew me when they were 5, and I see them at 25, and they're thanking me for what I did 20 years ago.
Right,
Right? It's that same type of thing, like what you're talking about, the impact of the world. It's not about the money, it's what
right.
impact can I have in the world. And I think that's a really amazing thing about you too, which and the company of what you're doing. You brought something up there at the end, kind of talking about being a growth expert, getting your doctorate in marketing and AI.
Mm.
AI, right? Like, look, I mean, the last 6 months, kaboom. You go back a year later, AI, yep, but the past 6 months and where it's going to be in 6 months, I mean, we're kind of the AI wars right now. So when you're talking
Mm.
marketing, growth, AI, what do you mean by that?
So one thing to keep in mind is most people don't realize that they've been using AI basically every day of their lives for the
Oh, I
last
agree.
20 years if they've been on the internet, right?
Yep, yep.
Many of the top companies in the world have been using it to just improve outcomes they're able to drive, which they're not able to do with humans. Google has, like, their search algorithm has used autonomous artificial intelligence for like 15 years, and their engineers have not known how that algorithm works to this day, for a long time. And that's the case for a number of different products, by the way. Neural nets are used, deep learning is used, big data. Anytime you hear the words big data, like machine learning and artificial intelligence are all being used. The big difference in the last 6 months is the commercial packaging of, more AGI or artificial general intelligence-esque, like chatbots and so forth. So it actually brings to the attention for even the layman how powerful these engines can be. And more often than not, they've been used behind the scenes in more niche applications. And usually there are like 3 ways that researchers have categorized AI in the marketing realm specifically. And it's mechanical AI, thinking AI, and feeling AI. Mechanical is like execution of tasks, given specific instructions and execution of tasks. Thinking AI is ingesting large seas of data and making strategic decisions within a core set of constraints. And feeling AI is things like sentiment analysis and prediction as a result of, how those emotions are transpiring, et cetera, et cetera. The combination and connection of all 3 of those is really difficult to achieve and make, any sort of product feel natural. And that's kind of what's caught on with OpenAI over the last 6 months, and now Google entering that commercialization race. They're both going to be lapped very, very soon by the open source community. So they're kind of shaking in their boots a little bit because there's not much they can do to stop that.
Yeah.
And the big explosion has really come just through the commercialization of AI, to the point where people have been afraid that it's going to destroy humanity. So
Yep.
all of
Well,
those
we've all
things
seen
have
enough of those
compounded.
sci-fi movies, right?
And honestly, it is not a crazy thing to think about. Like, it is, if unchecked, there's a very strong chance that it could occur that way. I don't think it will be unchecked. I think we're starting to see now that even the CEO of OpenAI himself is calling for, as recently, I think yesterday, was calling for very staunch regulation on the ethical use of AI. I think what we're seeing, and the threat is, you won't be able to distinguish what is real and what isn't as a human, which is going to be a very interesting psychological paradigm to live within. So there are going to be aspects of life that just will look very different as a result of AI. And it is something to be afraid of, but it's also something to really embrace lovingly and completely nerd out on.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just like anything else. It's a two-edged sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put the wrong tool in the wrong person's hand and things break. You put the right tool in the right person's hand and magic can be built, right? And so I think that's a big thing with AI. And I think everything opened up so fast with everybody. I don't think a lot of people's perception, like you brought up, of it's been out there forever, and not forever, but it's been being used. I mean, even we go back past 10, 15 years of you calling and getting an automation on your phone. Do you want English or Espanol, right?
Mm-hmm.
Number. I mean, that technically is a version of AI.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right. Also,
well, I mean,
being a business owner, scheduling appointments, having things automatically do it for you, like you brought up the chat bots, automatic conversations that happen with people through DM messages, text messages. It's been around for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people have even seen those cars that are driving around that are trying to be autonomous vehicles. That's all, several types of AI. You're interpreting data and making decisions as a result to drive the passenger where they're going, et cetera. So like all of those things, in my opinion, are very, very clear forms and uses of AI that most people don't necessarily appreciate in the same way. I think a lot of people see AI more so as a like mimicking the human brain. That's how people are thinking about AI today. And that's not wrong, but it's also not the full story. Right. So like that's the main thing to keep in mind there is just the like the term AI means a lot more than what you see on ChatGPT.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, looking at AI with you and talking about getting your doctorate in marketing and AI, you take your past 14 years of knowledge and using growth models to bring in billions of dollars worth of revenue, sell multiple companies, doing very well for yourself. AI doesn't know what to do unless you tell it what to do. So how are you taking your information, putting in AI to help you maximize what you can do for your clients?
The first thing that we're doing is, and we're building a technology product right now behind the scenes to do a lot of this without us having to intervene. But the first thing that we do, first and foremost, is we want to understand the customer more deeply than the founder ever has. And that looks like crawling all their customer data, crawling all of their behavioral analytics data, any other data that we can wire in to inform our understanding of what makes users think, feel, and behave the way they do.
Now, that's a very unique thing. I'm going to stop you there because I think a lot of businesses miss that. And I'm very, very, very susceptible to that type of messaging. And the reason why is because I started 25 years ago in fitness. If you don't know how to separate yourself in the fitness industry, you're going to drown. It's a race to the bottom, right? Like how many ads you see, hey, do you want to get rid of your dad bod? That's not a niche down. That's a white noise. And so many businesses really miss the mark on understanding the psychology of their customer, their clients, what caused them to come in and use your service, what caused them to actually want to share your service and go spread it to the world. There's a lot of psychology there that a lot of people just have no idea about. So when you're taking a look at that, what are some of those key points and why do you think that's so important with the clients you work with, especially with like a subscription-based business?
So it's not a huge leap for founders to assume that if they knew what made their users tick, if they knew what made their users think, feel, and behave the way they do, very clearly, and they knew not just why they did things, but why they didn't do things. Their win rate for, you know, their ability to actually, you know, create new great outcomes in their business would dramatically improve. The problem is most people, when they're asked like, who is your customer, they'll say like, it is you know, an entrepreneur between 35 and 45 who wants to make more money. And it tells you absolutely nothing. It's not instructive. It's not deterministic. You learn nothing about like how you're going to actually use that information strategically to like make decisions for the company, right? And I think that the more important aspect of that question becomes, you know, how can you get to know, like, for example, if there's somebody in your life that you know incredibly well, and you know exactly how to pitch them on something based on what's important to them, and how not to pitch them on something based on what's important to them, like what they care about, what they don't care about, etc. Like you're able to increase your win rate when you ask for things tremendously, right? And so like getting to know their psychology, what makes them feel things, how they logically justify those feelings, what they're motivated by, what rewards would be appealing to them. All of those things when combined are, you know, it's the equivalent of mining for gold for an entrepreneur. And, you know, because of that, I think that unfortunately what tends to happen in entrepreneurship is, you know, entrepreneurs are you know, they buy a branding package from a branding firm, and they're given 4 avatars, and they're like, these are great. We now know what our customer avatar looks like. And those assets sit all day on the shelf and collect dust forever. And unfortunately, they would just go back to making the same decisions that they otherwise would have made if they hadn't spent 50 grand on that. So like through that lens, what we do that's different instead is we basically say, okay, every single thing that we do comes back to that avatar. Every single thing that we do inevitably comes back to how does this piece of information iterate on our understanding of the customer. So for example, if we run an experiment, which is a foundational part of our process, if that experiment succeeds, we learn and we go back and we iterate on those avatars. If that experiment fails, we learn and we go back and we iterate on those avatars. Obviously, the worst case scenario for us is not learning. So it would be an inconclusive test. That would be like the nightmare scenario. So we try to take big swings to ensure that that doesn't happen, right? Now that's where a lot of the process begins. It's not where the process ends. But like it is critically important to the entirety of the process that we're iterating on the understanding of the customer every single day if we can.
Yeah. And looking at that important piece, I mean, if you're missing that, you're missing 75% of your growth potential in my mind. I mean, what number would you put on it?
I mean, like, if you don't understand your user, I mean, it's definitely more than 75% from my perspective. It's, you know, 1,000%, like really, honestly, because you know, otherwise you're
viable, right?
Yeah, I mean, so like, for example, you could, if you really understood every single aspect of the core motivation, the core psychology, the emotionality, and the rationality of all of your prospective customers, you would know how to speak to them, what to say, at what point in time, where their anxiety pops up, where it doesn't, where they're excited and you can capitalize on it, where they're afraid and they pull back and you can reach out to them with reassurance. Like you're going to be able to grow at an alarmingly faster rate if you know those things than if, for example, you're just assuming that you know everything and you're like, oh my gosh, like, of course, everyone in the world is going to want this because it's the greatest thing in the history of humanity. And that's like, unfortunately, the majority of founders and how they think about their own business. Yeah. Like that is one of the biggest potential killers, in my opinion, for any company, just because of the fact that like all of those things are, you know, you're taking a lazy approach. You might as well not do any targeting in any of your, like it would be if you're setting up some digital ads on Google or Facebook and you don't do targeting, right? You're just going to get a whole bunch of random bodies. Every once in a while, you're going to get people that fit, but otherwise it's going to be a whole bunch of people that don't care. And you're not speaking to them in a way that makes them care. So like it is one of the more massively effective aspects of growth is just iterating on that avatar as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and a lot of those avatars people have and they've been given, it's only used for the targeting portion, right? So now when you target 1,000 people, it's actually 1,000 right people. They fit this certain age group, income, likes, but not to the level of psychology you're talking about. Really, what makes that person tick?
Mhm.
What makes them change and take action? What makes them, which is really crazy and scary to think about, that we're getting to that level of sophistication when it comes down to marketing. And those things, I love that as well. I mean, obviously being in marketing, being in sales, being in business myself, doing coaching for people, like if you can't get someone to change, you're not going to be very successful in life. So looking at, let's say I come on and I hire you. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. What does that process look like? Well, because some of the biggest things for me, you can go talk to people out there. Oh, yep, by noon tomorrow, we're going to have 20 people on your calendar, or 100 more units sold, which it's all kind of BS.
Sure.
But the real important thing is how quickly do I make my money back? But also, how quickly do I actually see results happening to make sure that this is the right path I should be on, right? Because you don't want to waste 3-6 months hoping something works, which is why I see so many businesses fail as well. So that first 30 to 90 days, what do you kind of expect out of a client?
In the first 30 days, that's when we like build the growth model. So we expect that, the client will join us on 4 different.
You build one differently for every client.
We do. Well, we use some shortcuts. We have a bunch of pre-built growth models that are associated with the vast majority. We have 23 today.
Okay. Wow.
Anytime we build, like if we see a new situation that necessitates a new model, like we saw one last week. So we're building a 24th right now. And that was just a way that content was connecting to humans, like human workers, to then go out and solicit a sale in a way that we hadn't mapped, but absolutely could fit our criteria of a compounding loop structure. Yeah. So, we didn't invent the, compounding loop growth model, by the way. This has been used in like unicorn level Silicon Valley companies for many years. One of the first people to talk about this sort of thing, like publicly in mass, is Brian Balfour, who is the former head of growth at HubSpot. He and Andrew Chen got together, former head of growth at Uber, and created, really great platform to teach some loop-based growth modeling. So like that education does exist. It's not everywhere, and they don't teach to everyone. They only teach to, workers in large tech companies, and that's basically it. So if you're an internet marketer, if you're a founder that's not in a large technology company like Google or Facebook or something like that, you're usually out of luck in terms of who they teach and who they don't. In fact, like back in the day when I actually wanted to learn some of their kung fu, I had to really lobby for the better part of a year to actually get access. Wow. Because I wasn't associated with big tech company, and the way that their stuff was geared, it was just for that. But that's kind of a tangent. So in terms of like that first month, by the way, we typically will build the growth model, but to do that, we need a bunch of information on the company. So we have a long survey that a customer will need to fill out on like what's the starting point, so we can kind of build a state of the union of the business. We have 4 different workshops that we run in month 1, where we're looking at our 4 growth levers: acquisition, activation, and habit creation. And that one's important because a lot of people will think customer activation ends at the sign up or ends at the sale. And it doesn't actually. It ends when the user has created a habit, is when activation ends, right? Because that's the moment where you can actually hand it off to retention and engagement. How do I maintain and continue to feed the habit, right? And then lastly is monetization. How are we having some sort of fair value exchange? from the product value that we're habitually creating for that customer. So we do workshops around all 4 of those levers. We try to determine if there are what we call 5 fits. Oddly enough, there are actually 10: market, model, channel, product, message, but they all have to connect with one another. So that creates 10 combinations. So all of those factors we need to determine in month 1. We also want like a full video walkthrough behind the scenes of the business. Here's how everything works in detail. And that allows us to just get our arms around what exists today. And from that, we build the growth model, we build the strategy from all that information, and then we get to work. And then in month 2, we move on to a piece of the process that we just call BPI, or best practices implementation. And it looks a lot like our experimentation cadence that happens next, but we're just using a lot of the experiments that have already won over and over for clients that are similar. And we inject those into the companies, on day 1, because they just have a higher win rate. At the end of the day, there's just more data to speak to their efficacy. So for example, if someone is using a company generated, company distributed content loop, right? Which means they're creating content and they're distributing that content with the hope of acquiring customers. Let's say they have a podcast and they're generating some views on their product from their podcast. We want to take that the best practices implementation initiative that we often recommend for that, we call megaphone to magnet. And that one is just how do we dramatically increase the eyeballs on that content over the course of a long period of time? How do we also automate the process of engaging and responding with value to the customer, the prospective customers engaging with that content, brokering conversations with them? And then how do we bring them into the site experience as quickly as possible so we can cookie and retarget them, right? And we want to just continue to show them assets until they are in the perfect moment to actually take the next step. So all of those things would be a BPI test. That's just like best practices implementation. Once we've implemented the best practices for that business that we think are worthwhile in implementing, we will then move to high tempo testing and experimentation, right? Where we're taking what is working, trying to double down on those wins, taking what's not working, getting rid of them, freeing up that cash and that time associated with those things so we can do more of what works. Yeah. And then we just try to learn as much as possible about what works, what doesn't, as quickly as possible, iterating on those avatars with every bit of information and ensuring that we're getting at least 2 to 3 experiments for all 4 of those growth levers. So 2 to 3 for acquisition, 2 to 3 for activation, habit and creation, 2 to 3 for monetization, 2 to 3 for retention and engagement. We want 2 to 3 of those running always, because the speed at which we can learn about what makes the prospect think, feel, and behave the way they do, 9 times out of 10 is the speed at which we can grow.
Okay. And I'm going to, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to try to dumb this down for myself. So what you're kind of talking about, like kind of like if I was running ads, we split test 4 ads, right? Mm-hmm. Figure out which one's the best one. You guys are actually choosing 4 growth levers that you know are going to work in the business because you've done it before with other companies. And then those 4 different levers, you're actually testing them. So you're optimizing it pretty much day after day to take it from, hey, it just launched here, now we're going to get 100%. So you're actually growing a business. And, you and I were talking to Michael today, and he brought up, the analogy I use, instead of running ads, it's just one kind of building. You guys are building 4 or 5 different buildings and scaling them up to really maximize a business growth then.
Yeah. And look, the experimentation around an ad, it's great. Like you definitely need to do that. Yeah. But it's one of 100 other things that need to occur that you need to experiment around in a similar way in order to generate the kinds of outcomes that that user will want to generate, right? So like, for example, if I'm wanting to test 4 versions of an ad, that's kind of where most companies will stop. And they'll say, we're going to test 4 different versions and we're just going to go with one that works best. But that really is a handcuff on the potential for growth for that particular asset and how it can be reused later. A better way to envision it is what is the problem that we're experiencing, the user is experiencing, right? Like first and foremost, what's the problem? What's the hypothesis behind the why?
Yeah.
Let's test 4 hypotheses, right? Let's test 4 things that we think are important to the customer and we would resonate based on our understanding of who we're targeting, so that when we find a winning version, we've validated one of those 4 hypotheses above all the other ones, but we also have data around the degree to which we validated the other 3. And we can use the learning there and say, all right, let's double down on our win here. Based on the one that won, let's try to figure out why it won. Our hypothesis here would be this piece of it. Let's test it against this piece and this piece of it. And let's emphasize different aspects of it. And let's run that. And then doing that, and you start to iterate on that, your understanding of the avatar. Now, the next step would be, how do we use the validation of what makes these users think, feel, and behave the way they do at this step?
Yeah.
In the next step, in the next step, in the next step, all the way down to the point where you're retaining and engaging them forever, right? And they're paying you a whole bunch of money. So all of those things, if they're crafted correctly, like it shouldn't just be a horse race. Like a lot of people will run experiments as horse races, and that's what we call them, where it's like, here's 4 versions, let's just team them up against each other and see what happens. And we'll go with the winning one. And then like, that's great. We've run a multivariate test there, or we've run an A/B test with 2 versions. Cool. Like yes, you can find a winning version. And sometimes people will use that to settle an argument if they have 2 different ideas. But you're not really going to run a good growth process through that sort of ethos, because of the fact that like you can't reuse that learning anywhere else. Like if you look in the scientific community, and a lot of people will kind of poo-poo academia in startup land. They're like, college is worthless, academia sucks. Well, there are a lot of really, really smart people in academia, and they've used science to their advantage for a really long time. And if we take a second to acknowledge the fact that they actually know what they're doing in some ways, and founders know what they're doing in other ways, what we'll find is at the end of every single scientific research paper, there's always a areas of future study section where they're basically saying to themselves, based on what we learned, what else do we need to go study? What new questions are arising as a result of what we learned here? And that gives new researchers the opportunity to like craft new studies and build more understanding on how the world works in the way that it does. So like we can learn a lot from academia. And it's one of the things that crafted our methodology really well, is the fact that, yeah, I've been a founder for a long time, but basically the entire time I've also been in school part-time, right? Like I have 2 master's degrees. I'm getting a PhD or a doctorate right now. It's not a PhD, it's a DBA. So it's like the super MBA. Yep. And, you know, after that, I'll probably have another program that I'm going through, because I want to learn the things that other founders or other entrepreneurs are refusing to learn because they just don't want to acknowledge that institution, yes, it's overpriced. Yes, it's ridiculous and dogmatic and sometimes really dumb and archaic. But like the way that things are constructed, there's also a lot to learn there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's one thing that's awesome about you too, is that you're always trying to learn more. You know, looking at the growth models that you have. So there's actually something I'm going to bring up too, I don't want to forget, but the fulfillment side, you kind of brought that up, and I think that's something that's dying right now, but I'll touch base on in a second. But you have 23 different growth models, and so you take one of those, architect those for a client. None of those are really based around running ads or anything, right? It's essentially the building of the business in other ways than just running ads, correct?
So there's one growth model right now that is a compounding loop structure for paid advertising, but we never recommend it as a foundational like core engine. It can't, like, you can add it what we call as an accelerator, but like we would only recommend it as a as like what we call like an accelerator of an existing core loop. So like, for example, if you have a viral loop already built, yes, you can set up paid ads as like in a compounding structure. The problem with that, with not doing it in a compounding structure, is the way that most companies do it is they're asking for a plateau. They're approaching it in a linear way where they're saying like, all right, in month 1, we're going to spend $10,000 on ads. In month 2, we'll spend $11,000 on ads, and then $12,000 on ads, right? And they're like, over the course of time, we'll increase the size of our company. And that's how they'll model it out in their financial models, because, oh my God, we need a financial model to show our investors or to show myself, like, how are we going to deploy this cash?
Yeah.
A better way to think about it is every single user that comes through and pays us money, especially for us, because we only work with subscription-based businesses, the user that comes through and pays a recurring fee, a percentage of that fee then is allocated as growth capital, and a percentage of that growth capital is allocated as advertising budget, right? So over the course of time, based on the amount of revenue that you're generating from that user base, your ad spend is also growing proportionately. Now, the problem with that is you're going to top out that ad model, like on various platforms, relatively quickly, depending on the market you're serving. And you're going to have to find other sources for paid traffic that are just different economic structures. And if you don't have, if you build your entire business model around, for example, Google AdWords, the economics of Google AdWords are very different than the economics of LinkedIn ads, or Twitter ads, or Facebook, or Taboola, or Outbrain, or YouTube, or any of these other ad networks. Like, the economics are different, the behavior of the customer is different. And if you build your business around the core economics of one ad platform, you will plateau, and you're going to have to rebuild the business on the fly, because you won't have a pathway to growth. So that's why we recommend you never use it as a core engine. It's just an accelerator, because once that viral loop starts to spin really fast, you can actually start to pull back on your ad spend. And like, your viral loop will start to take over if it's really well constructed and optimized.
So why do you think so many people, you have so many people, that's their only option. You've got 20 plus other options, and that's not even the first option. Why do you think so many businesses go that route?
It's what a lot of gurus talk about. Like, for example,
Or like lack of education then?
Yeah, I would say definitely a lack of education. There's a lack of proper education, I would say. Like, for example, a lot of the very loud voices with very large audiences right now, they're going to teach what worked for them as if it's, this is the way, right?
Yeah.
And like, just do more of that thing. And it worked for them, so they think it will work in every single case. And the core truth is it won't. There are a lot of business models that paid ads just don't work economically at all.
Oh, agreed.
For example, if it's a low ticket B2C subscription site, you're not going to have the necessary, margin for paid ads at all. Like, early days of LinkedIn, for example, they were monetized through ads. So they maybe had like a $10 annual LTV for that customer. They couldn't like acquire customers for that amount of money and have any sort of money after the fact, right? So like, they were relegated to things like B2C virality and user generated company distributed content. And they did, and that's what they built their business around. And then inevitably they added more loops that allowed them to add direct sales and allowed them to add media buys and things like that to promote the site. Now, they added subscription-based elements to their site as well. LinkedIn Premium, Sales Navigator. They acquired lynda.com and increased not only their breadth of company distributed content that ranks for different terms, but they also were able to increase their breadth on their ability to advertise around core skill sets that through Lynda content, which is now LinkedIn Learning, they could ensure that they could more deeply monetize their existing customers, and they could more deeply, they could add more loops in an efficacious way. So.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's one of it blows my mind how many people don't have multiple ways that they're generating leads. And the fact that you have 20 plus, to me, it makes most business owners a no-brainer if they got a subscription business. Now, the thing I wanted to touch base too, I see it being a really dying aspect of fulfillment, customer satisfaction, retention, upselling, reselling, all of those pieces I see in really dying, where everything's just going electronic. You gave me money, cool. It just kind of goes. talking about the psychology at the very beginning, it's a very important part in the fulfillment. Like, how do you keep someone happy? If you're subscription based, you want that client for the next 90 days, or do you want them for the next 5, 6, 10 years? Right. So talking about that with the subscription based business, because if we could just increase retention by 20%, you change a lot right there. Now, if we bring in an additional 50% and we're able to keep half of them long term, that's a game changer in months rather than years.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that at the end of the day, one of the things to keep in mind there is, for example, like if you do the math, the mathematics behind growth don't allow for growth to occur if your retention rate isn't at a certain threshold.
Yeah.
So a lot of founders, for example, will get caught up early and they'll say, well, we've got like a 20% churn rate on an annual basis, so it's not that bad. Well, that's catastrophic, right? Like you will absolutely reach your carrying capacity and top out very quickly, and you'll probably bleed out and die as a business if you don't address it immediately, right? So like things like that are like, you can grow for a little bit if you were to like go through that process, but you wouldn't be able to grow to the degree that you want to if you don't address retention. There are very high level growth minds that call retention the king of all growth metrics, the power plant that drives all growth. Like all of those things and like inevitably become like the core aspects of your growth story is like, how well can you, because like the difference between company A who has twice as fast of a growth rate or an acquisition rate as another company, but the other company has a 20% better retention rate, the other company is going to inevitably win, and it's not close. Like it really isn't. So like those two scenarios, one of them might get more hyped up early on, just because of the fact that they're going to see some vanity metrics early on in the process that the other company doesn't see. But the fact that that first company can keep those customers, like they will without a doubt win in the long term, way bigger than the other company can.
Yeah, I learned that very early, actually, in my 20s. And actually, it really paid off in my 30s when I opened up my first brick and mortar business. I opened up my brick and mortar business. I had clients that had been with me for 10, 12 years. So I was able to open up a business where most people are in the hole, where the first month I'm making a profit. And to be able to grow from there. And retention, I see it just so many people out there, and it's going to depend on industry, right? Mm-hmm. That it's just more of a turn and burn. They don't care if someone completely fails, hates the product, never buys it again. And I think majority of them miss out on a huge opportunity. And that's where some of the psychology comes into play as well. I was talking to Jesse the other day, where he has his manufacturing company. It manufactures filters for his water filtration company, right? Mm-hmm. Keeping those people long-term, understanding why they would continue long-term, to where you're able to grow and scale that way, way faster when you keep a customer happy and always coming back to you, knowing you're the only option. So how much do you think that is a psychology up front, but also the viral loops and the growth models that you put in? Or is it kind of a combination of both? Is that kind of chicken and the egg type of deal?
I don't think it's chicken and egg. I think it's a lot more about, authenticity, expectation management, fair value exchange, proactive engagement. So for example, if you want to retain a customer, it really depends on the natural usage frequency of the product, first and foremost, because it really comes down to human beings creating habits or not. Like let's say, for example, your Instagram, you don't really have to care about retention because you know that your natural usage frequency of your product is like every couple hours. Yeah. And so you're squarely within the human habit creation zone. In fact, there's legislation that's probably coming down the pipe to limit the use of social media like Instagram for today's youth because like it's damaging for their psyche because it's
Or
addiction.
other ones canceled like TikTok altogether.
Yeah, there you go. You know,
Yeah.
and like at the end of the day, if the company is so addictive that you have to have laws written about its continued use, like you're doing something right from a retention perspective, right? Completely different conversation. And if you get to that point, fantastic. But most people don't. Now, let's say you're another type of a company. Let's say you're like Zillow, and you're selling homes, and your natural usage frequency of that functionality of your product might be every 7 years.
Yeah.
You're well outside of the habit creation zone, which is usually like a month or less, right? And if you aren't within that zone, typically you have to pay to acquire that customer again every single time. You have to go out, reach out to them, engage with them again. They've probably forgotten about you. You could be obsolete in their eyes by now,
Yeah.
right? Like that's old news. I did that 7 years ago. What do you got? What have you done for me lately? But what they were able to do instead is they said, how can we create a different type of core value promise that's integrated well within the fact that we do want to sell homes and create leads for real estate agents and so forth in a way that allows us to engage with the prospect much more frequently, once every couple of weeks or once a month. That's when they came out with their Zestimate feature, where you could look up any home and see how much it's worth and get all these scores and stats on it for free, right? So you're engaged with the platform. You're going through and searching for homes and seeing beautiful tours, aspirationally speaking, right? And they're sending out transactional notifications. These 10 homes met your criteria for your last search. So they've now got a couple different natural usage frequencies way more frequently. One is a weekly basis, one's a monthly basis. They have content around home ownership and things that you can do to improve the value of your home, things like that. They added rental features, which is a lot more frequent than purchasing a home.
Oh, wow.
All of those things, when combined, add to their retention and ensures that they can actually continue to keep that user engaged until such time where they're ready to hand the lead off to a real estate agent. So it really starts at that point and seeing how often can you deliver the core value promise for your user that they signed up for, and deliver it in a way that dramatically over fulfills like what you promised them, but also ensures that like now there's a reason for you to talk about them publicly. So you're blending the engagement with virality. You're also ensuring that, for example, you're able to, engage with them at varied frequencies. The nucleus accumbens area of the brain is the brain center for addiction, and it's addicted to the anticipation of variable reward.
Yeah.
So being able to like integrate that sort of neuroscience into the overall process is critically important as well. So all those things when combined, I think are core aspects of creating a strong retention aspect of the business. But in so doing, you also can introduce new problems, right? So like there's always, for every growth metric that you're trying to experiment around, there's always a trade-off metric that comes with that as well. So you want to acknowledge that and experiment around that in addition to the outcomes you're trying to create. So for example, if you're drumming up a whole bunch of new leads from a new channel, oh my gosh, like we've increased our lead capture rate like crazy. Well, what might happen as a result? Maybe my close rate is going to drop because the quality of those users isn't as high. Maybe my sales team is going to be over bandwidth because they just have more opportunities and they know what to do with. So, they won't necessarily see the benefit that they wanted at the end of that rainbow because their systems haven't scaled at the same rate. So one problem solved sometimes creates a new one that then has to be solved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm a business owner. I come to you. I have a subscription-based business. I'm making $1 million a year, good retention, decent growth. What reason could you actually find that I should not work with you?
What I would say, first and foremost, if you're too early, if you're making less than 50 grand a month, for example, or you're not venture backed, sometimes we'll work with venture backed companies that are on the earlier side, or a founder that has a business that is spitting off cash and they can fund an engagement for another company. Like we'll work with those companies, but it won't be the same way that we engage. First things first, we have to establish the 5 fits. We have to build the fundamentals into that company first. And we do that for a couple clients, but more often than not, the best clients that work with us are the ones that have already started a little bit of a fire, but that fire has reached its like full potential, like it's burning as much as it possibly can. If you need a full forest to connect with it, right? Like as a way of continuing to scale and burn faster and hotter and better, that's, you know, usually who we try to jump in with. So like, for example, best fit customers for us would be like B2B SaaS or service-based businesses that have a strong technology component, or, you know, companies that have some sort of remarkable element to what they do, like some of the subscription-based e-com, like monthly subscription boxes, or, you know, companies like that are definitely in scope because there are a lot of opportunities to introduce analog viral loops. So like offline viral word of mouth are big portions of that. Like the person that you talked about, Jesse, he's running a big water company, and there are a lot of opportunities for virality just with a simple addition to that core product, right? Yeah. So little things like that are really, really important. Now, the companies that shouldn't really come to us, like transactional businesses, e-com, where you're just a regular online store, companies where you're not spending a ton of time on the business, where it's just kind of a side hustle and you're not like a subject matter expert in what you're trying to do. If the product is in some way like deceptive or over-promising, like you're gonna get found out, especially like you'll get found out quicker if you inject, you know, growth fundamentals into that process, right? Your retention rate will tank and the company will die. So like those things are critically important, but like at the end of the day, a subscription-based business ideally with a strong technology component are, you know, core to what we do, and your margins are going to be better and it'll allow you more growth capital to deploy faster. Outside of that, I would say, you know, if you want to just set it and forget it and like have us come in and you don't want to be a part of that process at all, I would say don't do it. Like we want you to rewire the DNA of your organization around experimentation and growth.
Gotcha.
Like that is like a big component of what we do. If you only want to tack on like a lead gen firm, throw a rock and you'll find one. If you want to like actually bring in a growth team that will function as if it's, you know, a Silicon Valley caliber growth team that is in a unicorn company, fantastic. But it will require some involvement from your subject matter experts. It'll require buy-in from your full team. And it won't just be something that you can tack on that'll just create new wins. If you want to sell your business, by the way, you shouldn't work with our team package where we're doing everything for you, because it'll ding you with the acquirer. You'll want to actually have those be full-time team members that were or at least part-time in-house folks that we're working with in collaboration. So our lead package works really well there. Yeah. Because then you're actually building that core skill set in-house, and it's an asset that buyer will want. Awesome. So those are a couple examples.
Now you give a 100% money back guarantee.
Right? We do. We give we have a couple different types of guarantees. So like, for example, we will double your growth rate in 90 days or you don't pay, plus $1,000 cash for wasting your time. So that's associated with our team package. We control the speed of implementation, right? So that one absolutely exists. We get a lot of customers though that come to us and they don't have, they're plateaued, they're panicking and they don't know what to do. And if they're not growing at all, that first guarantee has no teeth, right? Like doubling zero is still zero. Yeah. So we have like other guarantees that still protect those customers in the event that they don't get what they bargained for. So for example, with those, it's basically we check in every 30 days. If you're not satisfied, just in general, with the quality of service that you got and the outcomes that we drove and the progress that we made, like you don't pay, you just get a refund. And like, for example, if we were to grow your growth model, or if we were to build your growth model in month one and you see it and you're like, this is not what I want. Like, this is not what I bargained for. Full refund, no questions asked. Like, that's totally fine. Not a good fit. It would not have been a fruitful engagement anyway. Then every single month after that, as we implement things, we just keep revisiting, like, are you satisfied with what we did? Do you want a refund for the past month or no? And like every single time, like the founder has a choice, right? Like, do they want to continue to engage or not? And if they don't at any point, like, we haven't had to get to give one of these ever, but like if they don't at any point, they have the option of saying, you know what, this isn't working. I would just love to have a refund on the last month. And like, if that happens, hey, that's fine. Like, we'll give a refund. You keep everything that we've done for you, and you can, kind of continue that journey solo. But we haven't had that happen before.
Okay. Yeah, which speaks volumes to your work too. But the thing that really perplexes me, so you've got 20 different ways you can build someone's business. You're giving someone a guarantee, and it's essentially a satisfaction guarantee. Like, if you don't like my face, I'm going to give you your money back. Why wouldn't a business work with you? Like, how could an owner tell you no?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, honestly. The answer that I often like we'll sometimes get a founder that basically will say like, it's not the right time. Like, I don't really know. Like, a lot of people will get scared. They don't understand, like, exactly what we do and how we do it. Or, a founder will be misrepresenting their revenue and they can't afford us, for example. And they were just, after a little bit of information, and that's fine. We understand that. I've done that before in my career. But it is a little bit of a waste of time. So like, if you're meeting our qualification standards, I don't see where there's a downside unless you're already doing all the things that we advise.
Okay. Well, and that's why I kind of asked the question, because it's almost like a no-brainer for everybody. And I know, I mean, you can bring the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I was just kind of curious why somebody would say no when you're pretty much saying, I'm going to guarantee results because I've done this exactly with your business. These are the multiple ways we're going to do this. This isn't going to fail. The only way to fail is not to do it. Now,
Right.
if for some reason you feel like you just don't like it, I'm going to give you your money back. Like, it's kind of a win-win type of scenario there. So that's why I was kind of curious. And I know it has to be the right business, the right company, and right.
Sure.
I mean, but for the most part, I mean, that's pretty exciting stuff that you make it that easy and that obvious, and kind of a no-brainer for clients.
And look, I mean, the business landscape is littered with agencies that underperform.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, that is 100% true. And, we are sensitive to that, and we want to make sure that, because we know that just because of past experiences with other companies that haven't done a good job, like, there will be a tax to be paid for anyone who wants to start a business that even remotely looks anything like something that others have created that, doesn't work, right? So like, that's something that we, definitely are sensitive to, and it's one of the reasons why we've tried to be as like open and honest about what we do and how we do it as possible.
Yeah. And I think that's so important for clients, especially nowadays. Complete transparency. Here's what we do. Here's how we do it. Here's the result we're going to get you. And now you throw in a guarantee on it. It makes things very, very simple for people. So.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna